my background is actually, I have a university degree from the studio art at the University of Guelph. So I have an arts background. I come from a family of artists. My mother owned an art studio, my grandmother before her. This has been a regular occurrence in my lifestyle. It's something that still holds dear to me. And we have seen many artists, including those in my family, that drive me absolutely bonkers, who sell their art for less than it's actually worth, or don't cover. There we go. Okay. Or don't value their own thing. And we want to make sure that you understand the value of your own time and the value of your work. I apologize if my internet goes funky. Please feel free to yell at me if I freeze. I live in Woodstock and work in Guelph, but here the internet has been really weird since the storm. So please feel free to say, I can't hear a word you're saying. You're frozen in a weird way. Paige, do you want to give a little background about yourself before we move forward?
For sure. So my name is Paige Bromby. I work for the Guelph Arts Council as the co-manager of programs and operations. I handle mostly the arts programming and the communications for that position. I also have a university degree in studio art and art history from the University of Guelph. I'm a practicing artist in Guelph. And I've had the opportunity to work for a few different artists as studio assistants. And I'm a little bit of a huge dork when it comes to artist professional development. So this is an area that I've done quite a bit of research into. Looking forward to today.
Wonderful. So we're going to start off with some important notes. There is no one right way to price your artwork. We are not going to tell you that this is the be all end all of how to do it. We are going to tell you some ways that might work for you, and the reasoning behind the ways that we are showing them. So every reason why we are talking about any of the pricing usually has a certain background based on business development or on art value and artist value. We also strongly believe that artists deserve to be paid for their artwork, and that consistency in pricing structures are important. This is one of those big things. If you take any workshops with me through the Business Centre, and you are all welcome to if you ever want to do more business development, you will learn that consistency is one of my favorite words. And I wish I had a big sign that said consistency that glue bright lights flashed at you every time I said it, because this is one of the biggest things in pricing and business development in every area, from marketing to programming to you name it. If you are in any form of business, consistency is one of those key things. And that is also understanding that family and friends are not your target markets. Family and friends will always ask for the biggest deal. So they are not who you should base your pricing around. I'm just going to do that as a side because it's personal experiences. Make sure you raise your prices. I know it's hard. My grandmother has been doing art since she was in her 20s, and she still struggles to add $20 every couple of years to her pricing. This is something that the markets change. What $5 was worth 10 years ago is not what $5 is worth now. We can all see it on the gas tanks, how it keeps going up. Think about that. So you still need to pay those bills. So you still should make sure that you raise your prices accordingly.
And a couple notes about that as well. If you are, if your practice has developed, if you have taken additional courses or you have advanced in your art career, that is another good reason to raise your prices. If you have done a certain number of shows where you feel like you deserve to get paid more for your work, or if you've sold a large chunk, if there's high demand for your work, you can raise your prices. That's how it works.
Yes. Give me 2 seconds. I am getting notice that I think somebody was not able to get in. So let me just check and see if they can send them. Yeah, I have somebody's like, I can't access the Zoom link. Sorry, guys, give me 2 seconds and I will send them the Zoom link so that they can join us in this conversation. Invite. there. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, and we're back. So yes, pricing, important. Importance of paying yourself. Art is not free. I will say this again, art is not free. Your time is valuable. You are valuable. You are the most expensive person. If this was just a general business course, I would also tell you, you are the most expensive person in your business. And as an artist, being you are probably working by yourself. And if you are planning on making this as a career, you are always the most expensive person and the most important person in your business. So you need to make sure that you're paying yourself accordingly. So valuing your own self-worth and what you're doing is, I know it's hard for all of us. You know, we could do this practice where I could say, stand in the front of the mirror and tell yourself how amazing you are. I make people do this all the time. You are awesome. You are amazing. You are an artist, and you can value that. And there is value there because other people can't do what you can do. So this is my forefront to everything, is own it, live it, breathe it. Paige, you want to add anything before I move to the next slide?
And good points.
You got this, guys. You're awesome. Own that to the base. So when we start talking about pricing, you will see throughout this presentation, we talk about base hourly rates. So when we do things, we often talk about an hourly rate. So what you need to consider, and this is going back to Business 101, and I know it's boring, and I know sometimes artists aren't always the best at doing the math stuff. We struggle with it. But the base rates is always that lowest rate that you can charge to cover your bills. So this is the very bare minimum. So if you are planning on making your art or making whatever is, whether it's a craft, whether it's a painting, whether it's digital, to pay for your expenses, you want to make sure that this is going to be your career. You don't want to work a part-time job, or even if you do, we want to make sure that you're covering those expenses. So your base rate should be approximately your your monthly living expenses. This includes your insurances, your heat, your hydro, because you need heat and hydro to create work in your space. You need the lights on. You might need internet. You know, these are things that you might want to consider. If you want to have savings, because we all have those ups and downs in our life cycles. We all have, like, maybe we get a lot of business near Christmas and no business in January. We still have to pay those monthly expenses. So we want to consider that savings. And then we also want to consider any discretionary funds. And discretionary funds are fun funds. That's where we get to go and do the climbing gyms and go to the gym or go to an art collective or go away to whatever, an event, you name it. Those are the base that we want to consider. Figuring out those is time consuming. And if you're anything like me, you hate being nitpicky about your actual living expenses because nobody wants to look at those numbers. But we need to do this. Just at least once every little while, see what your base living expenses are and make sure that they're at a point. If you're planning on doing this as your career, again, it's just you making sure you're covering your bills. You want to make sure it's at a comfortable level for yourself. So that bare minimum that you feel comfortable with. The reason I say this over and over again is because some people don't need a lot. There are some people who have a really low base rate because they're quite happy with their little mini apartment, and that's it. Some people want to buy a house. Some people want to go on trips internationally and do paintings in each different location. Those all cost different rates. So we want to make sure that whatever you're doing, your monthly savings and those discretionary expenses will balance appropriately to what you want to live as. From that, we'll take that monthly total, divide it by 4 for 4 weeks, divide it by 35 hours a week, because nobody wants to work a full 40 hours a week. 35 is actually between government standards and psychological studies, you name it. 35 hours tends to be a comfortable level of weekly hours for a full-time employee. Figure out what that number is. I guarantee you it's not $20 an hour. I guarantee you it's not $20 an hour. It'll be probably between $30 and $60 an hour as a base rate, potentially higher. Because if you're looking at $20 an hour, you can see on here, $20 an hour is barely $36,000 a year. That is not considered a good hourly rate. That is not considered a good salary. And whenever an employer hires somebody at a $20 an hour, they're actually spending about $30 an hour on that employee, because they need to pay into EI, they need to pay into CPP, they need to pay insurance on you, they need to pay all these other expenses on you. So an hourly employee at $20 an hour that they're making is actually costing the company approximately $30 an hour. If your base rate is only that $20 an hour, you're actually costing yourself, you're only really paying yourself about $10 to $15 an hour, which isn't even minimum wage. So I want you to get that in the back. $20 an hour for those of us who come from low income families and lifestyles seems like a lot of money, but it's actually really, really low, and we want it higher than that. So this is my spiel. Feel free to say, Angie, you're full of shit, and I don't think that any of this is valuable to me, but I want you to not be starving as starving artists. This is my base soul. I want you to be able to support yourselves and do the fun things that come with feeding your soul, filling those buckets that make you want to create stuff. Paige, do you want to add anything to this?
I'm just going to add that even if you're not quite at the point where you want to, whether or not you want to go with an hourly rate, because we're going to be working with all other pricing structures that aren't based on hourly, but keeping in mind this idea of hourly rate, and what, especially as you're transitioning, if you're trying to transition to doing this full time, having that in your head always, that even if you're not quite there yet, that is where you want to be, is like a very good guide for you as you work through your pricing.
Totally. And as somebody, like, I've done art, so as I said, I work for the Business Centre, but I also run my own business. I do illustration work for a lot of gaming things, from books and stuff like that. My rates reflect what I would like to be if this was a career. Like, if I only did this and I was charging the rates I'm at, those rates would be able to support me. I do a bunch of different things because I can never seem to stick to one thing, because that's just how I am. And I'm sure I'm not the only one in that boat. It's one of those things that you can project to where you would like to be. It's really a positioning thing. It's really understanding that it's that idea of like, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. And then somebody dresses like Batman. No, but yes, if you want to be something, or if you want to be in that certain space, start projecting what that would require you to be there, so that we can build it to that. And I don't charge hourly rates at all for anything anymore. I charge project based. But so hourly based pricing structure. So this applies to most mediums, and this can be anything from crafts, doing knitting, from large scale paintings to printmaking to sculpture, you name it, any kind of physical medium. You're going to have your time in hours. That hourly rate, which we looked at a base rate. Remember, this is base. This is the bare minimum. This isn't our highest rate. This is our bare minimum hourly rate. And then we're going to pull that into with material costs. And that's your base art pricing. This is one structure that works really well if you're good at costing out your materials. It works really well if you're good at tracking your time. And what I'm going to state straight out is download an app if you're wanting to do an hourly rates that is based on time management. Figure out how much time it actually takes you to do your stuff. Me telling a story, my mom does painting of dogs on little Christmas balls, and I made her track her hours because she does 4 or 5 balls at a time. Well, she'll do 4 or 5 balls because she needs to do something and needs to sit and dry, and then she goes back and does something else. The problem is she's like, oh, I get 5 of them done in a couple of nights. And I'm like, okay, but you don't know how much you get done in one. So I made her track all the hours from start to completion of all 5 of those, realized that she was taking 3 hours a ball, but she was only charging $12 a ball. She's not making anywhere close. So it's taken me 3 years, but I have now managed to convince my mom to charge more than $20 for a Christmas ball. But it required implementing, really sitting down and understanding that costing and that timing structure. And like, even if you're happy with not using it to pay your bills and it's just your fun money, you still want to make sure it's worth your time. And that's understanding what your time is valuable. And so doing whatever, however you want to implement this. Like I said, I really like, there's a bunch of apps online that you can like turn on and turn off whenever, and it'll time you. If you feel it's too structured for you, that's fine. Just estimate, but get a realistic estimate, especially if you're doing any research for whatever production. So like if you're doing a commission painting, you need to do all that client management. You need to do all that looking at the thing. You need to do your initial sketching. You need to do, before you even start that painting, that is time that you can charge back to that client. So these are things that you can add on into either your time count when you're giving them a quote, or you can add on as development stage. And this is a different way of pricing. It's adding on to this too, but there's lots of options. So other pricing formulas, the square inch formula. There's some larger companies, a lot of big artists. I know quite a few of them that'll do this way. It's your inches by your width. So length by width by a variable dollar amount. And that gives you your artwork. You need to figure out what that variable dollar amount is. That's your big thing. Paige, do you want to talk about that one at all?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm just noticing a typo here on the linear inch. It's not supposed to be length times width. It's going to be length plus width. Square inch formula for both of these two-dimensional pricing structures, they apply to art that might not take a whole lot of time. If you're working in fields like minimalism or some abstract expressionism, sometimes that work doesn't take 20 hours. That doesn't necessarily mean that that work is worth less than artwork that does take 20 hours. And so this gives an alternative pricing structure for that is fair and consistent and is something that you can reliably work with and also increase, right? You don't change the pricing structure. All you're doing is changing the variable in both cases. Square inch seems like the most obvious choice. A lot of professional artists, I mean, like a lot of big time painters, these are usually painters or illustrators who are using this. They use the linear inch for some reason. That's an old window pricing formula for some reason that got adopted by artists.
That's random.
It's super random. That was the only reason I was given for it, but a lot of people use it. I think there's a little bit less of a variation when you're working with multiple scales. I think that's the argument between it, where the difference between working super large scale and then going back down is a little bit less ridiculous in terms of how different the pricing is for that. I think that was the argument I was given for it.
My only concern with that would be that you might be losing money at the larger scale productions then.
Yeah, so I use linear inch, but what I do is I have two different variables. So I have a small work variable that goes for a certain, goes up to a certain size limit. And then I have a large scale work variable. And that's kind of the way that I've worked it out. Yeah, you'll find that there's about as many different types of ways to price artwork as there are artists, and everybody is quite opinionated in the way that they would like to price their artwork and the way that they think everybody should be pricing artwork.
Totally. That totally makes sense. I do a combination of all of them. So I have set rates for illustration. And then I have an added rate for color or detail, because if I'm doing a really simple dragon design, it takes me 20 minutes. It's completely different than doing a highly detailed full illustration of somebody's castle or grand house, which takes me like 4 days to do. And the detail level is an added variable I add on to my costing. So I have a base rate, I have a base hourly rate. My base hourly rate's $150 an hour. It's nowhere near $20, but I have a base hourly rate, and then I add variable pricing on top of it. So you can structure it how you see fit.
For these as well, like just in that line of thinking, like you can alter it and add different things. Like you could add materials to these formulas or the one before. Yep. Really easily, as well as other costs. You know, if you want to pay for studio space or something like that, if you have to pay for different materials or framing, that can always be added into the formula as well, fairly easily. So you kind of have, and whether or not, if you work across different mediums, kind of what Angela was saying with color and not color, you could, if especially when you're talking about mediums that cost, pencil crayons versus oil paint is drastic, and that's where the material costs can be really useful, but you can also just have a different rate for those two types of work or different types of mediums.
Yeah, totally. Moving into photography pricing, I know a lot of information here. So photography pricing, we're looking again, hourly rate versus, so adding the base fee per photo and number of photos. Now, that's one rate. So that's how they charge if you're charging an hourly rate for a shoot and final edits and you're including stuff. Another variation I've seen with a lot of the photographers that I know that have moved into commercial professional scales, instead of, you have the art scales, you have the professional, like corporate level, you have home-based photography, you have family photography. Each of them have slightly different rates and scales. The one I like to use, so yeah, my degree is in illustration and photography. It's the joys of injuring myself halfway through university degree. But I base my rates, and this is how a few of ours based on a half a day shoot. And it includes a set amount of edits based on amounts of how much it takes me or how much I want to charge per edit. And that is included. And then I add additional charges for additional edits. So in a 3-hour shoot, if I'm charging $400, that $400 is 3 1 hours, probably an hourly rate or a higher hourly rate, because you'll have to include travel in there, you'll have to include equipment costs in there, you'll have to include whatever lighting, and if you need to do rentals. And then on top of that, you add your edits that you're going to include in that package and make sure that it's all bundled. Bundling things makes people feel comfortable that when you're dealing with a client base, if you're really client facing, like this is for very corporate-y kind of attitude. If you're really client facing, having it in a bundled package with a set amount of stuff makes people feel really comfortable with that pricing structure. If you're telling them that, oh, it's an hourly rate of this plus this much per edits, people will go, oh, well, I don't know how many edits I'm going to need. And, oh, I don't know if I can fit that in my budget. Or I don't know if oh, well, can I only do it for half an hour instead? And that's where you start seeing a sway in your income and feeling like you have to give in too much to your clients. By creating a set rate of some sort for a set amount of hours, if it goes under those hours, that's still your rate. You don't give them less. You're being billed and you're booking out your time for that long time for them. If they don't utilize your full time, that's not on you, that would be on them. And then you can provide them, so you can use, there's some really great tools to provide them to see the photo galleries, whatever, it's not fully edited, and to choose which ones they want. And again, if they want extras, you can add it. But that's one format of corporate pricing. Not everybody wants to do that. Feel free to and again, it's up to you. Do you feel more comfortable charging an hourly rate and then adding fees on top of edits? Do you not want to charge for edits and you just want to charge a higher hourly rate? That's acceptable too. I've seen a few photographers who will charge a really high hourly rate. They're like a $200 an hour rate because it includes a large number of photo edits. So if they're doing an hour photo shoot, they're going to easily get 50 to 100 pictures in an hour photo shoot, if not more. They will choose the best pictures of there and edit them all. That's how they do for a lot of wedding photography as well. They'll do a larger scale hourly rate. And it includes whatever looked good in the photos, they edit them all. And then you can just print the ones you want. So lots of options.
We had somebody in the chat who just brought up that a downside of the bundled rate is that they don't, clients can get picky and say, well, I don't want that part of it and I don't want this part of it. And I mean, you're going to get that with any of your pricing structure that there.
Yeah. And this is where we didn't say it at the beginning, but we can say it right now. You get to choose your clients. You can say no. You can fire a client. I've done it. It's fun. You can choose no longer to work with somebody because they are not willing to meet your rates. For having an hourly, the reason I do a bundled rate, it's easy. I can just tell people, oh, for up to a 3-hour photo shoot, it's $400. Period. And if they want more, then I'll be like, an 8-hour shoot is this, and I have set rates for incremental times. But what's nice also about that is saying, if you're like, oh, well, that's a little high, can I do it for an hour and a half? I'm like, sorry, these are my rates. In order to come to your location and do the shoot for you, it takes extra time out of me. It's all bundled in. If you don't want to be my client, that's fine. I can reference you, give you a couple of referrals to other photographers in the area. But if they're coming to you, it's probably because they like the way you do your work. It's probably because of what you're doing is unique and they want to work with you as a person. If they're wanting to work with you because of your end product, they're going to have to pay for that. And they're going to be on your structure. You don't bend to theirs.
You brought up an important point there, Angela, that like in terms of traveling to a site, the setup and takedown of equipment, that's going to be the same whether or not it's a 1-hour shoot or if it's a 3-hour shoot. And so you want to make sure that it's worth your time, because going out for 1 hour, depending on where that location is and with all the setup and equipment required, that might not be worth your time.
And also if you are doing, so if I'm doing a larger scale photo shoot, and other people have done this, and I am going ahead of time to meet the client and to get the site visit and to find out who's coming in and to check the lighting structure to make sure I potentially rent equipment if I don't have the right equipment for the lighting that they're looking for or the quality that they're looking for. That's all on you time. So you need to figure out how to build that out somewhere. And by adding that in, some of that pricing into that hourly fee that you've considered or into that bundled fee will give you a chance to know that you're not just like throwing money out the window. Because we want you to just not feel bad about doing your work, not feel like you're getting taken advantage of. And if you ever get, and you'll get clients who suck. Just acknowledge in your brain that it's their problem and they're not the right client for you. And there'll be somebody else out there.
Whether you like, this is all time-based, you'll get people messaging you saying, oh, I love your work, but your paintings are too expensive. You'd be like, well, I'm so sorry. Not everybody can afford it. Sometimes you offer up multiples like little prints and you can have more affordable artwork that way. Sometimes you don't. And that's kind of a them problem, unfortunately, not a you problem.
No, and like we will talk about prints later, but I always think it's funny because I've had a few people when I was doing prints say, oh, well, I love it, but I want the original. And I'm like, that's nice. The original is a lot more expensive than the prints. You're not gonna get the original for that price. And then understanding, and we'll talk about this in contracts, understanding that even if you sell an original art to somebody, unless you put it in the contract and you put it clearly, you still own the work. That's still yours. So you can make prints of it. You can put it on your website as advertisements. You can utilize that because it's still, even if they bought that, the artist owns the right to their art. They're not allowed to do prints of your work and sell it. That's not allowed.
And that's a uniquely Canadian copyright. That's not the same in the States. It's a different different system. So we're very fortunate
and
in Canada for that.
Well, and in the States, it's different from visual art versus photography. So there's very different ownership regulations, but by Canadian standards, which I think most of you are from, I never assume that everybody's from Canada in my workshops. By Canadian standards, you own your work. It's proprietary information. So you own that visual element. So it's nice to keep that in the back of your brain. Important things to consider when pricing. Paige, do you want to go through this, or do you want me to just keep talking?
Yeah, I can go through this part.
Sure.
So there's a couple important things that you might want to keep in mind, and these are some of these things that we chatted about. We're adding them to your formula, or just keeping them in the back of your mind when you're trying to do your pricing out. If you're showing this work in a gallery and that gallery charges commission, if you don't add that onto your price, it will come out of your price and you will lose money. So commission can range anywhere from 10 to 50%. 50% is what most commercial galleries will use, and 10% is kind of on the lower end of other exhibition spaces. So keep that in mind, and you might want to price your work accordingly. If you're selling your work online, same thing. I know my e-commerce platform charges a small fee, and so I add that on top of my that percentage on top of my pricing structure, so that I'm not losing that money. Same with like any of those fees. Even if you want to build in your website cost into selling on that site, that might be something you want to consider. Your experience or stage of career can sometimes impact your pricing, and that's kind of something you need to decide on. But that can either mean the amount of works you've sold, as we talked about, like demand might mean that you can raise your prices and people will pay for them. The amount of the stage you're at in your career, whether you're an emerging, mid-career, an established artist, those are pretty loosey-goosey terms. Like there isn't very strict rules to define that, but it is a system that, like, the Ontario Arts Council uses to kind of put artists into separate boxes in terms of parts of their career. And it can be super helpful when you're trying to work out your pricing to look at other artists who are at similar stages in terms of their work. I wouldn't recommend using that as like a strict rule. You should still make sure that you're getting paid how much you need, but it can sometimes be helpful if you feel completely lost. One of the best things about most visual artists is that they have websites, which usually have CVs or artist bios, which can give you a pretty good idea of where they're at in their career. And they often sell their work online, so you can see their prices as well. So that can sometimes give you an insight if you feel totally lost as to where you should start. And as we mentioned earlier, there can be other expenses related to your work, whether that's studio equipment, studio rental, framing, other business related costs. You can always build that into your pricing structure to make sure that you're not losing money on this business.
Some ways to think about too about the career-based artist is considering your demand. If you have lots and lots of people coming to you that you can't keep up with it, there's probably a good chance that you're pricing too low, and you could increase your prices, even if you want to increase them nominally slowly, but you could probably increase your prices, because selling $100 pieces to 10 people, you only need 8 if you're selling them at 110. You only need 5 if you're selling them at 200. So same amount, you can have less, you can provide less commission work, you can provide less stuff for more, spend your time more on the actual production for equivalent fees, if you think about it that way. So I've seen some people who were doing, they produced multiple copies. They're sculptor, and they did a whole bunch of these little tiny sculptures, and they got such a high demand for them that she just couldn't keep up with them. It was like constantly like waiting list after waiting lists, and so she increased it by $5. And then the next couple months later, she increased it by $5 again. Still kept getting that demand. And then finally she got it to a point where it was slowed down, but it was still consistent. And she sat there for a while. And that's some ways to do it. So some ways, like little nominal increases will still mean they're an increase, but the people who want your work and who want to be around you and who value your time won't bat an eye at that. They'll be like, oh, okay, that's fine. They're good enough. They're worth it. And so it's just acknowledging that you can do that. Contracts and commissions. So this is one of mine as somebody who runs a billion workshops through Business Centre and talks a lot of business numbers. Contracts are one of the biggest elements, especially if you're in commission work or one-off productions. Anything time you're doing commission work or individual work for individual people, highly recommend creating a contract, even if it's fairly basic. Really nice thing, Carfax, I said that right? Yeah, Carfax has a whole bunch of templated contracts that you can download online. They're very nominal price. They have a bunch of booklets. They're a wonderful resource. You can also find a lot online of templates. Do review them. Make sure they're Canadian legal. So I know a lot of people who've downloaded templates off of various template for legal parameter ones and found out that they're not actually valid in Canada because it was based off of American rules, and those don't hold up in here. So we want to make sure that whatever you're doing, if you are doing one that's going to be kind of used forever and it's pretty straightforward and you're like, yep, I'm going to be reusing the same kind of contract over and over and over again because my artwork is kind of in this box, get a paralegal or a lawyer to do a review. It costs a bit of money up front, but it's better to have that. And then you know it's all covered and you can just have it so that it has those blanks of the client and your name and you put in the details. It doesn't need to be long. It just needs to be clear and concise and provide all the expectations that you as the artist, the business owner, the whatever, and the party who's commissioning you are understanding what's required. So some things to add in a contract. Again, doesn't need to be crazy. You need dates and timelines. How long will it take you to produce something? Is it going to be a 2-week turnover? Is it a 2-month turnover? Is it 6-year turnover? Putting those kind of timelines in, they can be pretty loose and you can have a stipulation. So for my own contracts, I like to break it down by project. So for a high-end illustration, I do initial sketch, I get an approval, I charge for that. I do a finalized sketch, I get an approval, I charge for that. And they're no longer allowed revisions after that final approval. And I set that in stone, like period. So, but I have timelines. This should take this long. I have a statement straight out saying, if your approval is delayed, the timeline will be adjusted accordingly. So if it takes them 3 months to get back with saying, yeah, that first part is great, well, that means that 3 months I'm not going to be working on their work. I'm going to put that aside until they give me that approval, and I'll follow up with them, but it means their timeline gets extended. Expectations for communication from both parties. Are you expecting them to communicate with you? Do they need to provide stuff to you? What do they need to provide? What kind of timelines do they need to have that by? And what expectations are they expecting from you? Are you just sending them regular updates once a month or once a week? Or are you providing them with rough drafts, sketched images, mock-ups? Those are all things that you'll want to put in that communication piece. And when are they expecting them? So based on those timelines, when are they expecting that kind of communication? By being clear in your contract when that communication is expected, you won't have those people online saying, I commissioned somebody to do me a dress and I haven't heard from them in a month. And you're like, yeah, it's because you just commissioned them and they have a waiting period of 3 months before they even start on the next commission because they're finishing their previous commissions. It says right in their stuff. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't actually read the contract. Well, that's great for you, but you should read it. But having that there means that you have that backup. It means that you can say, oh, can just review your contract. You can see we don't start this until this timeline. I will be starting on your project at this point. Because people often expect to commission an artist and for them to just like jump and start tomorrow. And I don't know about anybody else, but I don't have that ability to just start on their stuff tomorrow. I usually have a waiting period of a bit because I have other projects that I'm working on. And I'm sure most of you have other projects. And the bigger you get, the more clients you get, the more stuff you're doing for yourself and for your commissions, the more those timelines might extend out. Items required prior to starting to work. Are they commissioning a portrait? If they are, do they need to provide stuff to you? What do they need to provide? Are they expecting certain types of images? Are you expecting certain quality of images? Are you expecting a write-up on something? Depends on what you're doing. Are they requiring you to, are you expecting them to give you, are you sending them a document saying, here, can you fill out these things that you're interested in? These are things that you can put in place. If I do any online design work, I have a special contract that states straight out, you have to complete this profile so that I know what you like in your brand, what you don't like in your brand, what you like in this, what you don't like in that, so I can put it together. Because the worst thing is doing a commissioned work for somebody and getting past the first stage and finding out they hate the color pink. So we want to make sure that those things are forefronted. Stages of work development. Do you break it down in stages? I really like the stage process, but some people don't. And if you just make one-offs and you're not doing a stage process, you can get rid of that, throw it out the window. But whatever you're doing, make sure that's clearly written. If you are big on stage process, you can do things like I do my payment structures. It's a couple things down, but it's payment structure and timelines. I set up my payment structures that I get forefronted most of my cost. So I charge ahead of time at the beginning of every stage. I do not continue into that stage until payment for each stage is done. So I'm like, this is my draft stage, costs you $250. Once you pay me that, I'll do that draft. There's ways to do this. So it's up to you how you want to space out those payment structures, but you can add that right into your commission so that everybody knows in that contract when they're expected to pay you and you're expected to have that in your pants. I am a big believer in putting my cost, so that's the cost of my materials and the base cost of my time, up front. So that even if they disappear after stage 1 or 2, I've still covered my base costs because that's non-refundable. I have a non-refundable deposit, and if they decide to back out, they're not getting that back. And that covers my base cost so that I'm not out the cost of my paper, the cost of my inks, the cost of if I'm getting a canvas for them, those are covered up in my upfront costs, and that's straight in my contract. In order to commission me, these are my upfront costs. If you have approval processes, those should be clearly stated. If you have a revision policies, those should be clearly stated. I do not feel that all artists need to have revision policies. You can state straight out in your policy and procedures or in your contract, or if you want to create a standard terms and conditions document that you send to people, you can send those out and it has no revisions, or revisions after this stage are not allowed, or we only allow these kinds of discussions because I'm the artist and I'm doing the work. Because who wants to do a piece of work and then have somebody say, oh, actually, I don't like the way this person looks because it's not really the style I like. You're like, well, this is the style I do and why you commissioned me. So putting straight out whether or not you allow them to give that feedback in your revision policy is up to you. Like I said, I have mine, but again, illustration, I tend to do a lot more in the corporate spaces. I stop revisions before final production. You can only give me updates, revisions, and have your 2 cents on what the piece is looking in that development stage. As soon as I get to final production, there's no more revisions, because I'm not going to waste my paper. Like doing a giant illustration with pen and ink, it's not like I can erase it and change it. It's done. If they want a revision, it's me doing the whole thing over again. So it's just a waste of my money and the waste of my time, and there's a waste of your time too. So things to consider. Again, not all of these have to be in your contracts, but they're all things that you should consider when you're putting together commissions, especially if you're allowing commissions, and whenever you're talking with clients that are looking for bigger projects. Because if they're just buying your beautiful work that you're already doing, you don't need to worry about it. The only thing you need to state clearly is that they don't own the art. That's something that I like to put out there. But aside from that, it's up to you how detailed the contract needs to get. And it's there for your protection. Because just like dealing with the numbers part, dealing with the contract, it's boring and it's heavy and it takes time and it's lots of lingo and legalese and stuff like that. But it's there to make sure that you as the artist are protected and that you have your bases covered so that you don't have to worry about people being terrible. Because people are terrible sometimes. So like every page is like nodding her head. Do you have anything to add to contracts and commissions page before I go on?
My addition would be I don't do commissions, and you don't have to do commissions. Just so you're all of this, you don't have to do. Nobody can force you to do commissions. In case you're like, I don't want somebody to tell me what to paint. You don't have to do that. Or you can also create your own stipulations. For example, I would do a commission if somebody just said, I have this wall and I want you to create a painting that will fit on this wall. You have creative freedom. That's my commission stipulation. And that's just based on my personal preference. But you can, all of these rules can be shaped to you and your work and how you want to be making art. So, yeah.
Well, and I'm the same way. So like I do a series of Girls in Big Hats. They're illustrations that I do for the fun of it. I have it I have a website. I don't make any sales. I don't care. They're fun and I do them for me, and I have a large body of work of those. The works that I tend to get paid for are commission-based works that I do as for print, for reprints. So I charge accordingly because they're going to keep print using that work on dice bags, on books, on notebooks, things like that. I charge a higher price for those, but I have a contract in place allowing them to utilize it for so many years, giving them licensing rights for it however I want to put it. And there's a bunch of different ways to do that. But yeah, you don't have to take commissions. Oh my God, this is a conversation I've had with my mom a billion times because she's like, I really like doing this kind of art. And I'm like, just do it then. If people love it, they will buy it. If you want to sell it or just fill your house with it, whatever. But if you're wanting to take commissions, it's that whole customer service part of it that's a bit of a pain in the butt. But if you can put some things in place that you can just re-put out over and over and over again, then you don't have to think about it. And I'm all about building out things that are tools you can use over and over again.
Also just a good thing to think through in the sense that even if you don't want to be regularly doing commissions, those opportunities come once in a blue moon that you don't want to pass up. And then you're like, well, I need a contract now, or like, now I need a commission structure. So it might be worth just looking into, even if it's not something you want to put into your everyday practice.
Yeah, and having it there just on that off chance means that if you ever do want to, it's there. It's there for you to use, and you can tweak it as you need to. I got in the chat, Dale asking if we're sending out a copy of this PowerPoint. Yep, Paige will send it out with all the stuff for it too.
It'll either be, so we'll definitely have the video, and then it'll either be the slideshow attached, or we might just condense it into a PDF format just for ease of sharing. But the information will be shared with you.
Yeah, totally. And I agree. Sometimes don't be afraid to say no. From the chat, there's conversations about the horrors that can happen of commission. I agree, it can be brutal, but at the same time, if you get the right clients, and this is where we talk about that pricing structure, we talk about understanding that market, and this is where we kind of go into business 101, is if you are actually looking to do a commissioned based art business, then understanding costing and understanding client markets, who's your customer is, how you're going to market to them, what their values are, what their pay rates are, what kind of income they're making, means that you can target down those kind of people that you want to work with and not deal with any of the other people.
Another note just about that is you could always take on more of a tattoo artist's perspective when they have books open and closed, where you can have commissions open and then close them for 6 months, 3 years, 10 years. You make the rules. And at that point, you'd be like, you know what, for this 3-month period, I will take commissions, and I'll take 10 of them, or I'll take 1.
I know quite a few high-end seamstresses. Yes, words. Because I'm a crazy person, and I did studio arts at the University of Guelph, and then I did fashion design at Fanshawe College, and then did none of that as my career. But a lot of fashion artists, they'll do their own work, but they'll open up for like 2 commissions in a month or 1 commission. So they'll put a post out saying, I am taking 2 commissions. First 2 people who message me, and if I'm interested in those, I will take it. So they'll have people submit what they're looking for in commissions, and they'll pick and choose. A bunch of artists that do the artist alleys at comic conventions do that too. Like the high-end comic artists, they'll open their books up, but they'll only take the ones that interest them. Brian Kessinger, who does, I don't know if you follow him, he's a comic artist. He does a lot of like, he has a book out that's the Star Wars that looks like Calvin and Hobbes kind of art. His commission is, if you can give me something that seems interesting to me, then I'll let you commission it. So if it doesn't sound interesting to him, he doesn't do it. He'll be like, nope, no, I'm not, I don't like that. So people will submit a whole bunch of different interesting topics, and the ones he picks are the ones that he finds appeal to him. So I think that's a neat way of considering it too. So there's no one way to do this. I think this is something that we keep telling you over and over again, but there's no one steadfast rule. Reproductions and prints. So one way artists are able to create low cost artwork at times is doing prints and reproductions. Now there's lots to consider when you're pricing prints and reproductions. One thing that often happens with artists that I've known who've done a lot of prints is you end up with a large inventory of prints, you don't know what to do with it, and you don't know how to market it. So plan what you're planning on doing it, or do minimum print runs. By doing minimum print runs, you'll want to connect with the print company to find out what those cost. And when you're pricing those prints, you'll want to take into effect how much it costs to do the full print run, so that you can try and forefront that cost in the first third of that run. So if you're doing 100 print runs, figure out how much that print run costs and divide it by that first third. So that first 30 prints should cover the cost of that whole 100 print run. So kind of, that's one way of doing it. I've seen other ways of doing it, because prints will cost you on average, for small ones, $1 to $3 an individual print, depending on the quality. And this is where we start talking about materials. So what kind of stock of paper do you want? I always say it wrong. GICLEE. It's the high-end print art reproduction prints. Are you wanting that? Or are you wanting a basic digital print? Those are two options. Like there's also, you can do art cards, you can do postcards, you can do flat print, you can do high-end paper with the soft touch. That's the word. Silas got it. I cannot say it. And it's funny because it's a French word and I'm French. And you would think I could figure this out, but I have such a hard time figuring out how to say it. But all of those types of printmaking and all of those sizes change the cost structure. So again, we want to make sure that if you are doing prints that you're going to get those costs covered. If you are getting professional scans, so I have dealt with, it's called Art Print Inc. I think they're called, for reproduction print. They do beautiful work. I've known a bunch of artists that have used them. They do a bunch of different styles, a bunch of different qualities of paper. They have the option to scan. You can send your 20 by 24 canvas to them, and they'll tell you where to get it scanned professionally. So it's a high-end scan and not just from trying to scan it on your little computer or take a photo that looks right. There are places that will do professional photos where they'll do the artwork on a base, and it's a fancy camera that actually kind of stands over top of your work and is completely level and face down. And that's how they'll do a professional reproduction of your artwork. So there's different ways. And if you're in digital, then there's a layering, whole another level of layers that you need to talk about. How your art is getting copied and then how your art is getting reproduced or printed will change the cost of those reproductions. And we want to make sure that we consider covering those costs again. Remember, upfront those costs, try as much as you can upfront those costs, so that if you are going to an event that you're getting a booth, if you are doing it online, you're making sure you're covering those costs. You can also, there's always, it's not on here, there's always those online programs. If you have a Shopify, you can use Redbubble, or you can use, there's like 5 different ones that will do reproduction prints of art on things. They make most of the money. You make a really tiny bit of money, but it means that you don't have to think about all that quite to the same extent. That's also an option, because then you don't have leftover inventory. But understand that most of those aren't really a higher quality, so you kind of get what you pay for to some extent. If you are looking to do a higher quality prints, just really consider that leftover inventory, because I've done it. I went to a couple of events and had nice prints made, and then ended up sitting on like 40 prints for like 3 years. And I was just like, because my art moved on, but my prints were just those original prints that I just couldn't get over. And it happens. We all have done it. We all have spent that money ahead of time to go to a show or go to an event or something. So we want to make sure that you consider those inventory, because that takes space. And if any of you are like me and are doing a billion different things, my space is very limited to the stuff I'm currently working on and the things I really like. And I don't want to just have boxes and boxes of prints sitting around, and having to ship those out, and then having to package them, and then having to cart them to different things. So it's that level of what you feel is appropriate. I think it's at the end of this. There is one that's called Art Ink Print. I think they're out of BC, but there are about 4 other ones. I think it's even one. There was one in Guelph. I don't know if there is anymore, but there's a bunch in Toronto too that we can find some page. I'm not sure if you have some references. I see because there's a question about scanning artwork and getting high copy quality scans.
I don't think they market themselves, or I know they don't market themselves as doing this, but I know they have done good work. Ampersand Printing in Guelph, I have seen do good reproductions of artwork. It's obvious they are a marketing and print company, so they don't target themselves specifically to artists, but I know they have a big table for scanning artwork, and they
Perfect.
do. So
that's great. And they're local, so can't go wrong with support local. lots of options. Copywriting for artists. Paige, do you want to take over while I take a drink?
Sure. Yeah. Sorry, I know you've been chatting. You're definitely more in the commission contract sphere, especially.
Well,
I know James at Ampersand is wonderful. I agree. My sister used to work at Ampersand actually a long time ago, so I quite buy
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so we mentioned Carfac earlier, and if you guys aren't familiar with Carfac, definitely check them out. They are a wonderful resource for artists. There is a Canada-wide one, and then there is each province has their own Carfac equivalent. And they provide things like artist fee schedules, which can help you have recommendations for how much artists should get paid for work that isn't related to their artwork. So things like sitting on a jury, giving an artist talk, exhibition fees, that type of thing. And they're also one of the leaders in arts advocacy. And so they're the ones who had originally fought with artists to get that copyright law in Canada put in. And so, yeah, the exhibition right, Canada is one of the few countries that have incorporated an exhibition right into our copyright law. So you may see some stuff on social media. Their campaign is #HasTheArtistBeenPaid. And this is why one of Guelph Arts Council's main advocacy points is making sure that public exhibition spaces should be paying you for your work if your work is not for sale. So if they will not let you sell your work at whatever venue it is, they should be paying you to exhibit that work because you are providing them with a service. So that is something that you can always leverage any exhibition space that you have that you're working with. The reproduction right is what Angela mentioned earlier, which is that you own your work unless you sign the ownership of your work over to somebody else. You will always own your work. You can reproduce it even if you've sold the original. So that's something important. And the moral rights, we've just listed them there. They're related to the reproduction rights in terms of you have the right to your work. It has to be under your name unless you want to remain anonymous. You can protect your work under being used by anybody else in any other way. So although it's not, we want more artists' rights and we're always fighting for more artists' rights, we're quite happy with the ones that we have as well.
Yeah.
Against parody. Depends.
Parody is funny. It's a whole kettle of worms.
Well, there's parody, and then also there's a lot of leniency for creative freedom. We're all copying each other always. Nobody has ever had an original work of art ever. We're all building off of other people's art, and there is quite a long history of what we call copycats. They wouldn't like being called that, but there are artists who have exhibited in very famous galleries who have literally just taken a photo of somebody else's work and they acknowledge that it is a photo, or there's a lot, you don't have to, ready-mades or like that. There's a lot of leniency for creative freedom, but somebody cannot take your work and say that it is theirs without changing it in any way.
Yeah, and that's something that I've had huge discussions on various platforms, including like socials and Reddits and with people about the idea of owning an art style. And so you'll get every now and then you'll get somebody who's like, this is my style. And you're like, you can't own a style. I'm sorry. It's not copyrightable. Your individual work is copyrightable. Your individual work is can be trademarked to you. You can put all those extra protections in place if you want to. But at the same time, if you do a mixture of pen and ink, you do a mixture of pen and ink, and somebody else can mimic that style of pen and ink. There's a reason that the people like Brian Kessinger can do art in the style of Calvin and Hobbes and not get in trouble. It's because it's not Calvin and Hobbes. It's just mimicking Calvin and Hobbes, but it's his own stuff.
There's a famous art quote that says, all the best artists borrow from other artists. So
Yep, and we all learn from somewhere. And I don't think anybody in this room started drawing, started painting, started creating without copying something somewhere. Like you have to, there's a certain amount of learning that comes from reproducing other pieces, whether it's small pictures or whether it's taking elements. I've also had giant arguments with people who don't like using real life models to reference for their own drawings, and it's tough. People move. You can utilize that. It's not a problem as long as you're not directly copying things. So somebody recommended Steal Like an Artist as a book. So there's a lot that you can talk about this, but do note the main takeaways. You own your work. Nobody else does unless you give it to them. Unless you tell them directly in writing in a contract that they own reproduction rights of your work. One way to get around that is licensing out your reproduction. So if you are, so big guys like Disney, that's what they do. So they have their, nobody can copy the Disney princesses. They're strict as all anything. They are one of the strictest company out there for their own work. They're crazy because they have people that go to small comic conventions and give people cease and desist letters. Like they will hunt anybody down who's reproducing Disney work and pull them off the internet, you name it. But that's part of it, is if you have a copyrighted work, you have to do the research and you have to do the thing. But they will allow licensing. So the way they get around that, so people can put it on, print it on t-shirts. It's not like Disney is making those t-shirts. They're not putting them on pillowcases themselves. They are licensing out. They have licensing agreements to utilize a piece for multiple reprints. So if you have a piece of work that you have somebody come and say, hey, I would love to get this on t-shirts or do something, you can charge licensing fees. And that might have, we see this a lot in, I've seen it in the book and illustration space, and I've seen it in a couple of other spaces. But by having those licensing agreements, sometimes they're remuneration based. So sometimes you get a percentage also. They have to pay a licensing fee plus a percentage of sales. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's certain. And make sure if you are ever doing remuneration based versus percentage, it's percentage of gross, not percentage of profit. I know this has kind of gone off topic, but they'll always say they lost money. 90% of people who will say, oh yeah, will try and say that they lost money. So you want a percentage of gross, because it doesn't matter if they made money, they're still using your work. So you deserve that percentage. So things to consider. So resources, we're at the resource page. So we added in that art ink print. We should add in ampersand and the art printing studio that somebody suggested in Oakville.
A few others. And I mean, my mistake, I didn't include, Guelph Arts Council has a resource page as well that links to resources like this as well
Yeah.
Articles that we've done on similar things. It's also where this PDF will live permanently in our resource section.
And like Carfax, wonderful resource. Photography pricing guide, wonderful resource. If you have any businessy related stuff, connect with us at the Business Centre. It's one of those things that if you're an artist that is planning to make this as a living in some format, you are a business owner. I know it's hard to realize this. As soon as you sell something, you're a business owner. And artists, we have a bad habit of not acknowledging that we are business owners. So understanding business to some extent is good, because then you know what rules you can break and what you shouldn't. So, and as always, not all of this is set in stone. There's options. Another resource that somebody put in the chat page was Picto in Toronto. Awesome. So lots of information. We have about 10 to 15 minutes left. Do we have any questions, comments, thoughts, feelings, emotions? Yep, we can do that. So what I'll do is I'll stop the recording and then we can have a chat and then nobody has to worry about proprietary information. So hold on a second. I'll say thank you for those watching later on. We will connect with us, success@guelphbusiness.com, the Guelph Arts Council as well. Stop.